Stop. Do not scroll past this. I need you to picture something for me. You wake up in a hospital bed. You can barely lift your arms. The morphine is wearing off and every breath feels like broken glass. And the first thing your husband tells you, the man who held your hand at the altar 11 months ago, is that you no longer have a home to go back to. Not because of a fire, not because of a flood, because while you were unconscious and fighting for your life, your mother-in-law forged her way through a power of attorney, called up her brother, and sold your house out from under you for $340,000. The house you bought before you ever met her son. The house with your dead mother's roses still growing in the backyard. Now here's the part that destroyed them. She never read the full contract. Not one of them did. And that one line they skipped, that single clause buried on page 7 of a deed they never bothered to open, took everything they thought they'd won and handed it right back to me. This is that story. And I promise you, you are going to want to stay until the end. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the only child of 2 people who were not wealthy but were deeply, quietly disciplined. My father drove a school bus for 21 years. My mother worked as an ER nurse. They owned their home, paid their bills on time, and never once asked anyone for anything they hadn't earned first. That's the house I came from. That's the woman they built. I went into healthcare administration after college. Nothing glamorous, insurance coordination, patient records, billing systems, but I was good at it, and I saved every dollar I didn't absolutely need to spend. By the time I was 28, I had enough for a down payment, a solid credit score, and a very clear idea of exactly what I wanted. A 3-bedroom colonial on a tree-lined street, cream-colored siding, a red front door, and a kitchen with original hardwood floors and a wide window seat that faced the backyard. I want to tell you why that window seat mattered so much to me. My mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer when I was 25. She fought for 14 months. In the last good season she had, the spring before she passed, she moved in with me into the apartment I was renting, and every single Sunday morning she would make a pot of coffee, carry it to whatever window faced the most light, and just sit. She didn't read, she didn't watch anything, she just sat with her coffee and watched the morning come in. When she passed, my father followed her 14 months later. Heart failure, the doctor said. I know better. I know he simply couldn't figure out how to be alive in a world she wasn't in anymore. I was 26. I had no siblings. I had some savings and a job and a very deep, very quiet grief that I didn't have the words for yet. So when I found the house on Marigold Drive and I walked into that kitchen and I saw that window seat facing the backyard, I sat down in it right there during the open house and I made up my mind. That house became mine on a Tuesday in March. I signed every document myself. No co-signer, no partner, no family money. My name, my savings, my house. I want you to remember that because it matters enormously later. I met Daniel Harlow at a hospital fundraiser 2.5 years after I moved in. He was 36, sandy-haired, broad-shouldered, with the kind of relaxed confidence that made people gravitate toward him at parties. He laughed easily. He remembered small details, your coffee order, your sister's name, the thing you'd mentioned once in passing 3 weeks ago. He made you feel chosen. I was careful with him at first. I'd been careful with everyone since my parents died. But he was patient. He showed up consistently. He said the right things and then actually did them. And somewhere around month 4, I stopped being careful and just fell. We got engaged after 10 months, married 11 months after that. His parents lived in Glendale, 40 minutes north, a big, immaculate colonial with a 3-car garage and a perfectly edged lawn. His father, Gerald Harlow, was a retired contractor, quiet mostly, smiled at the right times, said very little that wasn't first approved by his wife. Margaret Harlow. I want to be precise about how I describe Margaret, because this story is not about a cartoon villain. She wasn't loud, she didn't scream at me, she never once raised her voice. She wore pearl earrings to a backyard barbecue. She corrected the way you set a table while smiling warmly at your face. She asked questions that sounded like compliments but landed like assessments. She was the most dangerous kind of woman, the kind who makes you feel flattered while she's measuring exactly how much you're worth. The first dinner I ever had at their house, she waited until the salad course to ask it, completely unprompted, no preamble. "Claire, sweetheart, whose name is the house in?" "Mine," I said. "I bought it before Daniel and I met." She tilted her head the way a woman does when she's filing information away. "How impressive," she said. "You must be so proud of yourself." I smiled. I said, "Thank you." I thought it was a compliment. I was wrong. It was an inventory. The first year of marriage was genuinely good. I want to be honest about that. Daniel was warm. He cooked on weekends. He fixed things around the house without being asked. He was the kind of husband who made me believe I'd built something real. Margaret kept her distance, mostly. She visited occasionally, always called first, always left on time. Gerald sent me a Christmas card with 2 crisp $50 bills folded inside it, which I found so charmingly old-fashioned that I stuck them in a frame on the refrigerator instead of spending them. Then October came, and everything changed. I need you to understand what happened to my body that fall, because the sequence of what came next is important. I developed a serious abdominal condition, the kind that doesn't negotiate. I was admitted to St. Vincent's on a Tuesday night in severe pain, taken into emergency surgery by Thursday morning, and transferred to a private recovery room by Friday afternoon, where I spent the next 3 weeks barely conscious on a controlled IV drip, in and out of medicated sleep. 3 weeks where I could not manage my own affairs, 3 weeks where I could not make phone calls, 3 weeks where I trusted the people who said they loved me to protect what was mine. That was my first and only real mistake in this entire story. On Saturday, just 4 days after my surgery, Daniel came to my room with a manila folder. He looked tired. I assumed it was from sleeping in a hospital chair. He said his mother had offered to step in and handle the household bills while I recovered, utilities, the mortgage, the basic stuff. He just needed me to authorize it with a limited power of attorney, standard procedure, nothing to worry about. I was on Dilaudid. I could barely hold a pen. I signed. Looking back, I want to shake myself, but I also want to be gentle with that version of me, because she had just had emergency surgery and she was scared, and her husband was sitting beside her holding her hand, and she had no earthly reason to believe that the person she'd married had driven to that hospital with a folder prepared by her mother's attorney. No reason at all. The first alarm came from my best friend, Nadia. I've known Nadia Chambers since 7th grade. She is blunt, loyal, and constitutionally incapable of keeping her mouth shut when something feels wrong. On day 4 of my hospital stay, she sent me a text that I initially dismissed. "Claire, there is a man in a suit with a clipboard walking around your front yard. He has a real estate agent's car parked in your driveway. Please tell me you know about this." I called Daniel. He laughed, actually laughed, and said his mother was just keeping an eye on the neighborhood values, that she liked to stay informed about the market, that I shouldn't stress myself out. I let it go. I was exhausted. My body was trying to survive. Margaret came to visit me once during those 3 weeks. Once. She brought white tulips. She knew I hated white tulips. I'd mentioned it at my bridal shower, and she sat in the vinyl chair beside my bed and looked at me with the soft, practiced concern of a woman who had decided something and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She asked me, gently, oh so gently, whether I'd ever thought about simplifying, whether the house felt like a burden for one person to manage alone, whether I'd considered something easier. I looked at her from my hospital bed and I said, "Margaret, I'm not alone. I'm married to your son." She patted my hand. She said, "Of course you are, sweetheart." And she smiled. And I can still see that smile because now I know exactly what was behind it. That night, Daniel came by around 9. He was distracted, checking his phone, stepping into the hallway to take calls, giving short answers. I told myself he was overwhelmed, that this was hard on him too, that stress looks different in different people. But then, around 10 o'clock, I heard his voice through the wall. My room was a private room off a narrow corridor, and the walls were thin, and his voice carried. He said, "Just make sure the papers are clean before she gets discharged." I lay there in the dark, and I told myself it was about the hospital bills, the insurance forms, the discharge paperwork. I should not have told myself that. I was discharged on a Wednesday morning, 23 days after I'd been admitted. I was weak, I was pale, I had lost 11 pounds, I was wearing the clothes Nadia had brought me in a bag because I hadn't thought to send Daniel for them. He picked me up 45 minutes late, which I noted but didn't comment on. The drive home was mostly silence. He kept both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road and answered every question I asked in the fewest possible words. Something in my stomach that had nothing to do with my surgery began to tighten. When we turned onto Marigold Drive, I saw the lockbox before I saw anything else. It was hanging on my front door, bright yellow, the kind real estate agents use between showings. I said, "Daniel, what is that?" He didn't answer. He pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine and sat there staring straight ahead. I got out. I walked to my front door. I put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. My neighbor, Bill Patterson, was edging his lawn across the street. He saw me standing there. He turned off his edger. He walked slowly over with his hands in his pockets, and the expression on his face was the kind that people wear when they have to deliver news to someone who doesn't know yet. "Claire, oh, sweetheart, I thought they told you. I thought you knew." The house had sold 3 days before my discharge. I sat down on my own front porch steps, the ones I'd painted slate gray the summer before, alone on a Saturday afternoon with a country playlist and a second glass of wine, and I made my husband sit down next to me and tell me everything. And he did, finally, all of it. Margaret had taken the power of attorney I'd signed in my hospital bed, and she'd used it to execute a property transfer. She had found a buyer, her own brother, a man named Ronald Briggs who lived 2 towns over, and she had sold my house for $340,000. Every cent of that money had gone directly into a joint account she controlled with Daniel, supposedly to clear debts he'd accumulated over the years. Debts he had never once mentioned to me, debts I had never once been asked to help with, debts that, I would eventually discover, may not have existed at all. I turned and I looked at my husband, this man I had trusted, this man I had married, this man who had driven me home from the hospital knowing, and I said, very quietly, "Daniel, your mother sold my house while I was unconscious." He looked at the ground. He said, "She said you'd understand once you got your strength back." I said, "I want you to get off my porch." And then my phone rang. It was Rebecca Holt, my real estate attorney from 7 years ago, the woman who had handled my original purchase. I hadn't spoken to her since closing day. She said, "Claire, thank God, I have been trying to reach you for 2 weeks. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. There is a very serious problem with what just happened to your property, and I need you to listen to me right now." I stood up from those porch steps, walked to my car, and I listened. I drove to Nadia's apartment. I didn't trust myself to drive far. I sat down on Nadia's kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, and I cried until I didn't have anything left to cry with. And I want to tell you something honest. I'm not embarrassed by that. I had just been through surgery. I had come home to a lockbox. My husband had known. He had picked me up from the hospital knowing. He had driven me down my own street knowing. He had let my key put in that lock knowing it wouldn't turn. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I need to tell you what that house meant, because without it, you won't fully understand what they took. My mother planted climbing roses along the back fence the spring she moved in with me when she got sick. Pink roses. She tied them to the fence with strips cut from an old t-shirt. Because she said garden twine was too rough on the stems, I had been caring for those roses for 4 years after she was gone. I had learned when to prune them. I had learned how they moved toward the morning light. Margaret Harlow sold my mother's roses to her own brother for below market value. When I stopped crying, I called Rebecca back. Here is what Rebecca told me. When I had originally purchased the property on Marigold Drive 7 years ago, 28 years old, fresh-faced and terrified and so proud I could barely breathe, Rebecca had insisted on adding a custom protection clause to the deed. I had asked for it. I was a single buyer with no co-owner, and I wanted to make sure that no future partner or spouse could transfer that property without my direct, unambiguous involvement. The clause stated clearly, specifically, unambiguously that any transfer of title on the property, including transfers made through a designated power of attorney, required the original notarized signature of the sole owner of record, in person, in front of a witness, with a current government-issued ID present. Not a proxy, not a representative, not a signature obtained while the owner was sedated in a hospital bed. Mine. Margaret Harlow had drafted her power of attorney off a standard template from her personal attorney's office. They had never pulled the original deed. They had never seen the clause. They had assumed that a standard limited POA was sufficient to execute a title transfer, because in most cases it is. But not in this case. The sale was void, and, depending on what Ronald Briggs knew going in, potentially criminal. I want to tell you about the 3 weeks that followed, because this is the part people always underestimate. I moved into Nadia's second bedroom. I slept on a pullout with a bar that hit me in the spine. I was still recovering from surgery, still on prescription pain medication, still physically not at full strength, and I made a decision. I was going to be completely still, completely quiet. I was going to let Margaret Harlow believe she had broken me, because I needed time, and time was exactly what she wasn't watching for. Rebecca formally took my case on contingency. The first thing we did was retrieve the original deed from my safe deposit box at First National Bank, a box that existed in my name only, opened before the marriage, which Margaret and Daniel had no knowledge of. The original deed with the clause was exactly where I'd left it. Then we pulled phone records, and here is where it turned. The record showed that Daniel and Margaret had discussed the property listing, had researched agents, had initiated conversations 3 weeks before my hospitalization, not after, before. This was not a spontaneous decision made in a moment of financial panic. This was planned. They had been waiting for an opportunity. My emergency surgery was not the cause. It was simply the window they'd been waiting for. I obtained my complete hospital records. Every date I had been under sedation, every hour I had been medically incapacitated, all of it documented, time-stamped, signed by attending physicians. And then Nadia found the hotel receipts. She wasn't looking for them. She was helping me sort through a shared email account that Daniel and I had used for household subscriptions, streaming services, a gym membership, things like that. But there they were, 2 overnight stays at a Marriott in Westfield during my 2nd week in the hospital. His name, a room for 2. I closed the laptop. I sat with it for a while. Then I added it to the file. I did not confront Daniel. I did not call Margaret. I texted Daniel occasionally, short, sad messages that implied I was overwhelmed and defeated. I let him relay that impression to his mother. I let them both believe the story was over. And then Margaret called me. She used that smooth, measured voice of hers, the one she used when she was delivering bad news in a way that was supposed to make you feel like she was doing you a favor. She said she wanted to offer me $15,000 out of her own generosity to help me get on my feet somewhere new. She said the sale had been regrettable but necessary. She said I was young enough to start over. Then she said, "You can't fight us, Claire. We have family attorneys. We have Daniel, and honestly, honey, you have nothing." I said, "I really appreciate the call, Margaret. Let me think on it." I hung up. I sent the full recording to Rebecca within 60 seconds. Rebecca called me the next morning before I'd finished my coffee. She had been working overnight, she said, and she needed to tell me two things. The first, the recording was extraordinary. Margaret had explicitly offered me a financial settlement to abandon my legal rights to my own property. That is called consciousness of guilt, and it is exceptionally useful in court. The second thing stopped me cold. In pulling the title transfer documents, Rebecca had confirmed what we'd suspected. The buyer was Ronald Briggs, Margaret's brother. The house had been sold to a family member at below market value. In the state of Ohio, a fraudulent transfer to a related party for inadequate consideration is not just a civil matter, it is a criminal one. But then she told me the third thing, the one I hadn't seen coming. Rebecca had a colleague in consumer protection law who had run a standard background search on the Harlow family as part of case preparation. He had found a sealed small claims case from 5 years earlier. A woman named Ashley Crawford, Daniel's girlfriend before me, a woman who had owned a small catering company in Columbus. After their relationship ended, she had alleged that Daniel and Margaret had pressured her into signing over a business vehicle and several $1,000s in equipment to cover, quote, debts Daniel owed her. The case had been quietly settled. Ashley had signed a non-disclosure agreement, she had taken a payout and disappeared. I was not the first woman Daniel Harlow had brought home to his mother's scheme. I was not the first asset they had targeted. I had not been chosen because Daniel loved me. I had been chosen because I owned a house. The court ruling came on a Tuesday morning in March. Gray sky, cold. I was sitting in Rebecca's office conference room with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand when her paralegal walked in with a printed copy and set it on the table. I'll read you the part that mattered. The transfer of title executed on the property located at 412 Marigold Drive is hereby declared null and void on the grounds that the executing power of attorney did not satisfy the sole owner consent requirements stipulated in the original deed of record dated March 14th. The sale is deemed legally defective and of no force or effect. The sale was void. The sole owner consent clause was ironclad. No standard POA could override it. The sale to Ronald Briggs had no legal standing. He was required to vacate any claim to the title and surrender possession of the property. Ronald Briggs, it turned out, had known. Rebecca's team found an email chain between him and Margaret's personal attorney in which the clause had been flagged and dismissed. He had been told the risk was minimal. He proceeded anyway. That made him civilly liable for participating in a fraudulent transfer. His legal fees, combined with the judgment against him, exceeded the original purchase price of the house. He spent the better part of a year paying attorneys on both sides. Margaret was referred to the county prosecutor's office for investigation on deed fraud charges. The recorded phone call in which she had explicitly offered me money to walk away from my own property was submitted as Exhibit A. A criminal hearing was scheduled. I filed for divorce. The affair documentation, hotel records, credit card statements, and eventually Daniel's own admission under oath eliminated any viable claim he could have made on marital assets. He left with his car, his clothes, and approximately $60,000 in personal debt. He moved back into his mother's house. That house, by that point, was the last place either of them wanted to be. Margaret's legal costs, criminal defense, civil liability from the Briggs case, and a separate judgment from Ashley Crawford, whose NDA had contained a 5-year sunset clause that Margaret's attorney had apparently missed, consumed the entire $340,000 from the property sale, and then significantly more. Her social circle, the women she'd lunched with for 20 years, the neighborhood association she'd effectively run, they all found out.
Truth moves fast in small communities. It always does. Ashley and I met for coffee at a diner off I-71. She was guarded at first, careful, the way people are when someone has already taken something from them once. But she came. She sat across from me and she listened. And when I told her about the sunset clause in her NDA, I watched something shift behind her eyes. She joined the civil suit. Together, our cases established a documented pattern of predatory behavior that the court found both credible and significant. My neighbor, Bill Patterson, who had watched me shovel my own driveway alone for 4 winters, who had received Christmas cookies from me every year, who had watched me cry on my porch the day I came home from the hospital, wrote a character statement on my behalf without being asked. He said he'd watched that house for years and he'd watched me love it. He said I was the kind of neighbor a street was lucky to have. I cried harder over that letter than I cried over almost anything else. I went back to Marigold Drive on a Saturday morning in late April. Rebecca had handled the key exchange through the title company. Professional, clean, no drama. I drove there alone. I sat in my car in the driveway for a while, just looking at the cream siding and the red door, letting it be real. Then I got out. I walked up my porch steps, the gray ones, still gray, still mine. I put my key in the lock. It turned. The house smelled like a stranger, someone else's candle, someone else's cleaning product. Ronald Briggs had repainted my kitchen an aggressive tan that made the room feel like the inside of a paper bag. The hallway floors needed work, but the window seat was still there, right where it had always been, facing the backyard. And when I walked out the back door, the roses were there, overgrown, wild, a little leggy from a winter without proper care, but alive. Pink and climbing and absolutely stubbornly alive. I sat down in the grass next to them. I didn't do anything for a long time. I just sat there. I have been back in this house for 4 months now. I repainted the kitchen, a warm ivory this time, brighter than before. I refinished the floors with Nadia and her boyfriend over a long weekend in May. I found a box in the basement that had been missed by the chaos of everything, sealed with old packing tape, and inside it, wrapped in newspaper from 2019, 6 of my mother's coffee mugs, the ones with the blue flowers around the rim. I sat on the basement stairs and held one for a long time before I carried them upstairs. They live on the open shelf above the kitchen window now, right above the window seat. Margaret's criminal hearing is still pending. I gave my impact statement. The outcome is in the hands of the court, and I find, surprisingly, that I don't spend much time thinking about it. The law is handling Margaret. I don't need to. Daniel texted me once about 2 months after the divorce was finalized. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known how far his mother would take it. He said he hoped I was healing. I read it. I set my phone face down on the kitchen table. I made coffee in my mother's blue flowered mug. I carried it to the window seat, and I watched the morning come into the backyard the same way she used to. I didn't reply.
I want to leave you with exactly this. Margaret Hadlow was meticulous. She researched, she planned, she waited for her moment. She had done this before and gotten away with it. She was the kind of woman who believed that careful preparation was the same thing as being untouchable. But she never read the full contract. Not once. She read the parts that told her what she wanted, and she skipped the rest. And the part she skipped was the part that ended her. The dangerous ones always do that. They are so completely focused on what they want to take that they stop paying attention to what's actually there. They see a target. They stop seeing a person. They stop seeing fine print. Know what you own. Document everything. Read every single line. And if someone ever tries to take from you what is yours, make sure you've already read page 7.